Friday, July 14th, 2017, and this is Real in the Field Gulls? Oh, man, it could be. It might as well be. I don't know what the name of this show is. Is it Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur? Is it Real in the Field Gulls? It's one of those two, or maybe it's an amalgamation of either or. But it is myself, Kenneth Arthur, and as in the past, my co-host, Danny Kelly. Formerly of Field Gulls, now of The Ringer, NFL writer over at theringer.com, and coming back to grace us, I guess, about a little more than a year after we made the transition from you leaving Field Gulls and me assuming your position as the managing editor at Field Gulls. It's been about a year.
Yeah, it has actually.
Yeah,
I think July 5th was my 1 year at Ringer.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, we're getting up there. And even as I said,
Crazy.
July 14th, it reminded me of Con Air. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
I think
the movie Con Air?
Yeah, you know the movie Con Air.
Yes, I know that movie. Yeah.
This is actually, we're getting right into Real in the Film Goals right up the top.
Don't even waste any time.
No, we're starting off Real in the Film Goals with Kenneth Arthur and Danny Kelly. July 14th, I believe that in the movie Con Air, there's this scene with Nicolas Cage, and he's gotten this teddy bear and this note from his daughter that he's never met because he went to jail before she was born.
Right.
And the letter said, "My birthday is July 14th. My daddy gets out of prison on July 14th. I'm gonna see my daddy for the first time on July 14th."
How the hell do you remember that?
Yeah, I believe this is Con Air Day. Nobody has talked to us about this at all.
Get that hashtag going on Twitter. I think that's important.
Yeah, we're going to find out. We're going to get into it. We're going to get into Con Air, and then we'll get to the Seahawks in a little bit. So, Danny, what were your thoughts on the career of Nicolas Cage when he was hitting all those action movies like Face Off, Con Air, and The Rock?
I know that I loved Face Off when I was in middle school, and that might age me a little bit. I think it was in middle school, but man, that was like the most badass movie when I was that age. Who's the director of that again? Because he was like a big deal for a while.
The director of Con Air,
or the director of Face Off.
Oh, is that a John Woo movie?
Maybe, yeah. All I remember is that like the director at that time was like so hot right now. And I remember being super stoked about that. And the title with like the dash in the middle, so cool.
Yeah, the slash.
It is John Woo. Yeah, the slash, not dash.
Yeah. So yeah, John Woo did direct. Yeah, that was the whole the doves thing. You know, where you release doves during that,
like in slow mo.
Yeah. He some of the John Woo's other films up to that point. I mean, we're not talking about some of the other ones that he made prior to coming to the U.S., but you know, Broken Arrow.
Oh yeah, holy shit!
That was the one that preceded Face Off. But then, I mean, he came back.
Bulletproof Monk. Remember that one?
I don't.
Okay. Oh wait, he didn't direct that. He was just a producer.
Yeah, you got to go to those directing credits.
My bad.
Producer ones. It's a little trick that IMDb plays on people sometimes.
Smart. Let's see. Wind Talkers. I don't think that was a very good one.
But when he came back, I a couple years ago, I rewatched all the Mission Impossible movies, and Mission Impossible 2 is by far the worst.
Yeah.
John Woo didn't do a good job there. Paycheck didn't get a lot of love. And since then, he's only directed something called Red Cliff 1 and 2 and The Crossing 1 and 2.
Huh. Good John Woo tangent there.
All right. So enough about John Woo. Let's talk about John Schneider. Huh?
Yeah. Good. That was really good right there.
I give credit to John being the most popular name out there today. What are your thoughts on the name John?
It's a good one. It's very versatile. You can spell it in at least 2 different ways.
Yeah.
It's a good, strong name. I'm into it.
Speaking of strong names, let's talk about some of the Seahawks strong moves during the offseason.
Wow.
As noted, you've come on the podcast a couple times, I think in the last year.
I was thinking, wait, is this the only time I've come in the last year? But I think I've at least one other time.
At least once you've come back for this show.
Right.
But I know it's been a long time, so we can talk about pretty much anything. You get your thoughts on the Seahawks.
I can't even remember what happened last year. I blocked it out of my memory, I think.
The Seahawks went 10-5-1.
Oh yeah, God, that fucking the tie game was like the lowest point of my Seahawks fandom, I think.
Yeah, and what if they had just won that game instead of tied it? They would have gotten the number 2 seed. So,
yeah, and then okay, then they lost like a game late in the year that definitely screwed them over.
Yeah, they lost to the Arizona Cardinals 34-31, which was 2 weeks after they got blown out by the Packers 38-10. So.
Oh yeah, they ended the no losses by more than 10 points thing, right?
Yeah.
Is that the first time in like forever? That was like since
like the Bengals game in 2011.
Crazy.
So that gives us, we start to get into that baseline for what we're starting from then, if we're going to recap the Seahawks entire offseason, which is, going 10-5-1. They beat the Lions in the playoffs in the wild card game. They come back and they face the Falcons. Devin Hester has a big return for the Seahawks that could have put them in a position to really take the momentum and get going with that game. But then it's called back on a questionable penalty. The Seahawks end up losing 36-20. The biggest news about last season for me, and I think for most people, would be the difference in the Seahawks between before Earl Thomas broke his leg against the Carolina Panthers and after. Because in that game on Sunday Night Football against the Panthers, the Seahawks win 40-7, but Earl Thomas breaks his leg. And after that, the pass defense really falls apart. I know you've spent you've been tweeting out and you've been writing about the difference in the Seattle secondary post Earl Thomas, which was our first look at a Pete Carroll defense without Earl Thomas ever with the Seahawks. And we saw them give up 30 points 3 times over that course of that time without Earl Thomas, including the playoff loss. So what is the collection of your thoughts on, what the Seahawks couldn't do well without Earl Thomas, and what a big of a difference it'll be to have him back now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was I think the most illuminating thing of last season, other than, Russell Wilson, I just don't think was healthy the entire year, which limited a lot of what they could do on offense. But yeah, Earl Thomas not back there, kind of patrolling in the middle of the secondary, basically just changed the entire defense. I think I saw the DVOA was like with Earl in there, it was like they were 5th against the pass per DVOA, and then when Earl was out, it was like 31st or something like that. So it was just, I mean, you couldn't have a starker difference when he went out to when he was in there. So I mean, it's like it kind of makes it clear that we've had all these arguments over the years, like who is the most important player on the defense, or what's the most important position in that Pete Carroll defense. And I think we kind of got a pretty good answer with what happened last year. So he's kind of I think he was, when he got re-signed, he said something along the lines of like, I'm the one that runs this thing, and he wasn't lying. Like without his range and speed, it kind of like creates a, waterfall effect of, just everyone's just not quite as, sharp. Everyone's not quite in the same position, and they got beat over the top a whole bunch more last year. It just kind of all fell apart. And so, I mean, I think it's good that they got Bradley McDougald. I don't know if he's really like a free safety style guy. I think he's more of like a strong safety, but having a little bit of depth there is good, because I think they saw like if you lose Earl, it changes the whole dynamic of your defense. And so, I mean, it was crazy that I actually don't think I even realized at that point that we hadn't seen a game without Earl until last year.
Yeah, it's crazy like how long that some of the things have been going on now for the Seahawks in terms of, now we're talking about Earl Thomas going into his 8th season. Like it's 8 seasons now with Pete Carroll, John Schneider, Earl Thomas. 7 seasons with Richard Sherman. Even this is going to be 6 seasons now with Russell Wilson. So time is flying by.
Yeah.
One of the things that Ben Baldwin wrote for the Field Gulls on the Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman comparison, and talking about the value, is that we haven't had a chance yet to see what the defense would look like without Richard Sherman at this point. So it's a little unfair to compare the two until we were forced to see, the Seahawks without Sherman and with Thomas, and how much the defense would struggle then.
Yeah, that would be interesting also.
Because we've definitely seen what it looks like without, someone like Byron Maxwell or Brandon Browner. We've seen Seattle have to struggle with not having a number 2 corner that was that good. And Richard Sherman, the reality of Richard Sherman not being on the Seahawks was addressed a lot this offseason. What were your thoughts ultimately on the Richard Sherman trade talks? How serious do you think that those could have gotten? And do you think he'll be around for more than another year?
That's tough to answer. I mean, obviously, I think they were serious enough. The talks were serious enough that there was a reason it came out, and that it was, in the public forum or whatever, and that both Richard Sherman and the team were talking about it. So I think I think it's clearly something that they tried to talk to teams about. I don't think there was ever any serious. I don't think they ever got close to pulling the trigger, because I'm guessing no team ever came close to offering what they were going to want for him. We've heard like several different reports on who wanted the trade, whether it was Sherman who asked the team to try and trade him, or if the team was just trying to do it on their own volition. I don't really know, but I don't think they ever actually got real close to making it happen. So I don't know. It was, just another in a long line of sort of drama things that happen with the Seahawks. But I think at the end of the day, it's probably going to be a little bit less crazy this year with Sherman. I think, hopefully he saw kind of like how big of an impact some of that stuff off the field and on the sideline and stuff had last year, and kind of like screwed some things up. So hopefully that doesn't happen again this year. But I think he still could be around for a while, but I'm guessing we might be in the last season of his Seahawks career, but you never know. I mean, it's always kind of a surprise with him. I never really know what to expect. So like, he could come back and just like, not be wanting to move on and just kind of just go back to being the Sherman that everyone fell in love with, or, this could be kind of the last hurrah. Who knows? Where do you land on it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely there's some sort of turning point coming up, that the Seahawks have to make some decisions with these guys now for the first time. Really, their core players that they've done such a great job of keeping together, and as they start to get closer to 30 or over 30. And I do think it's also interesting to not get also too panicked about guys that are 30 years old, because,
right,
we've seen that players of certain caliber can last until, 34, 35. So even if we're just talking about, I think that there's, 2-3 years left in this player. And with Richard Sherman, in terms of as a player, as an individual, he certainly could play another 7 or 8 years, as far as if the Seahawks want to keep,
I kind of feel like it depends on how they do this year, which is kind of a cop out, I know, but like if the Seahawks do really well, if they go back to the Super Bowl or something really great, I mean, winning helps heals a lot of stuff, and so I could see them kind of just patch things up, and he could be a Seahawk for life. But at the same time, if they struggle this year and like, shit just doesn't work out, like I could definitely see them moving on. So
right.
If I had to bet, like if I had to put money on it, I'd probably put money on them keeping it for at least this year and next year.
Right. Yeah. They'll definitely, I'm sure if it's a strong year for both him and the team, then it's going to be the looming contract stuff, because, 1 year left, that's when the Seahawks can, find themselves starting to, I think, have those negotiations. I think Sherman has 2 years. Yeah, he has 2 years left on his deal.
I was just going to look that up. Actually, I couldn't remember.
And he's only making about $11.5 million per year, which is, if he was a free agent this year, he probably would have gotten $16 million a year or something like that. So that's another thing that'll play into it. And, how much money can they spend? But overall, I think that they probably do ultimately want to stay together. It's just, I think it'll also depend on how some of the other guys do. And we'll get to those young guys here in a minute. I want to try and go in some sort of chronological order as well. And, if you're looking up contract numbers and you want to talk about them later on or whatever, that's fine too. But just in terms of free agency and all the talk about the offensive line, the Seahawks, having a bad offensive line last year, but ultimately bringing a lot of the same guys back, not getting maybe TJ Lang or making a high draft pick on an offensive lineman. So essentially putting themselves in a position to maybe start 3 or 4 of those same guys again. but their biggest move being the signing of Luke Jokel from the Jacksonville Jaguars. A struggles there. Yeah. So 1 year, $8 million for Jokel. What were your thoughts on the contract, and what are your expectations for the offensive line overall?
I was just laughing because Mina just jumped on the call. I don't know.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Mina?
We're not getting any audio from Mina at the moment. So,
anyways, we'll wait for her to figure out her audio. But yeah, the Seahawks offensive line. I'm almost like sick of talking about it because I don't know what else I can add that we haven't really already talked about. Like the Seahawks are obviously doing this as sort of, it's like their MO. Like they're just not going to spend a lot of money on that position group. They're spending it on other stuff. Their defense. Obviously they've got a relatively high number of guys like making like sort of top dollar style contracts per every position that their guys are making money at. So I don't know. It's like, you can complain about it, and I definitely understand why people are mad about it. But at the same time, it's like they're choosing to do this. This is kind of like the way that they're going about it. And so I don't have high hopes for Jokel. I mean, it would be, he's kind of like, he's a good flyer, I guess. And they're not married to him for long term, but I don't know. It just seemed like a really strange deal to make. 1 year, $8 million. It seemed really high for what he has done in his career. And then on the other hand, like they're not like getting him for a long term either. So if he has a great year, then they're gonna have to pay him like a shitload of money. So it just felt like a weird deal. But I don't have high hopes for the offensive line. I think they'll be maybe a little bit better than they were last year, but I don't think it's gonna be like a crazy. All of a sudden, they're like one of the top offensive lines or anything like that.
Yeah, it's.
I don't even know who's going to be where. That's like the thing,
Yeah, there's so many questions left unanswered, even when you talk about any position besides center and who's going to be a guard and who's going to be a tackle, and certainly the Jokel thing. It's like you're basically banking on.
Yeah, Mina.
Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? Good. I just heard that Seahawks offensive line talk, and it woke me up. I was so excited. I literally fell asleep in front of my computer, like face on the keyboard, smash keys.
You're working too hard.
For anyone who needs the visual, I just got up too early. How long have you been talking O-line here?
You just got at the beginning of it, so you're just in time.
Yes.
Yeah, we're just talking about the signing of Luke Jokel and the 1 year, $8 million deal, and sort of talking about how it might put them in a position of, if he does well, do they really want to pay him? If he doesn't do well, then what were they really doing making the move in the first place? How satisfied were you with Luke Jokel signing?
Well, I feel like we don't even know what it looks like for an offensive lineman to do well enough that Tom Cable wants to pay him. Because I thought Justin Britt would be worthy, right? I mean, we all think he's done well and is arguably the best offensive lineman, and it seems totally likely that they won't pay him, which is infuriating. Right. So I don't even know what that looks like, and they're still not being clear about whether he's going to play left tackle or slide in, right? It's still a big mystery.
Jokel, I don't even think we know if he's going to be healthy by the time the season starts.
Nice.
He's like the biggest. He's the biggest X factor on this team, probably. Like he might not even. He might be on the PUP list for all we know. But I don't know. They could have him at. I think do we know what the latest is? Like the plan to have him at guard or tackle? Because I think Schneider has said a couple times he's better at guard.
Well done.
Yeah, I think the latest is that they're going to start him out at guard and
keep Fant at tackle. Wow.
Yeah, see how George Fant does at left tackle going on forward. But
and then Ifedi at right tackle.
This can change immediately.
Yes. They've been pretty consistent about the Ifedi at right tackle thing. Like that seems like a thing that is going to happen. Which great. I mean, if it works, that was the hope when they drafted him, right? Did we feel like we've all reached the nihilism stage of talking about the offense? Like, I don't even sense that much anger in any of our voices.
Absolutely. That's what I was saying just before you got on. I'm like, I don't even. It's like, what else can we say about it at this point?
Yeah,
right.
Just let it happen.
Yeah,
let the mystery be.
I think it's a better situation than they were in a year ago. I can say I feel confident that at least the fact that some of these guys have experience and they've had experience playing a year ago as opposed to, the year prior where, George Fant had zero experience, and we knew that Bradley Sowell wasn't going to be a good option, and just putting in Gary Gilliam at left tackle and then having him immediately switch over to right tackle and drafting a right tackle who immediately went over to guard. And even the move at center for Justin Britt certainly didn't seem like we couldn't have imagined it would go that well. So
isn't the Gilliam career arc in Seattle is like the perfect microcosm for what their offensive line has been like. He came in as like a tight end. He was a tight end previously for Penn State at one point. He kind of tried to bulk up, get bigger. He was super athletic. They started him on one side. They moved him over. People thought he was playing pretty well, and then the Seahawks benched him like for a couple games. And then we all start saying, oh, actually, he did pretty well. And then they just let him go for nothing. That's like the perfect Seahawks offensive lineman arc.
What are we hearing on Ethan? Am I saying right? Posick, right?
I don't even know if it's Posich or Pochich. What is it?
We'll find out, because he has been listed as a center, a guard, a tackle, all things. Has there any word coming out from the summer of where they want to play him?
I think that the beginning hope was as a tackle. So
definitely be a guard then.
Yeah.
All right, Ethan Posick, defensive lineman. Got it. All right. Well, the reason I asked about that one was I remember when the draft happened. I'm not a huge college football junkie. Certainly when we get to, the second and third round, it's whoosh for me. But I was around some college football guys at ESPN who were very excited about that pick. So that seems like a high upside one for me.
That was my first reaction with Pochich. Apologies for if we were screwing it up.
He's definitely listening.
Yeah, sorry, Ethan. My first reaction was like, okay. And then the more I looked at it, the more I kind of watched tape on him, I got more excited. So I actually think I think he'll be pretty good. So I'm definitely high on that. I'm probably higher on him than any other offensive lineman on the team other than Justin Britt at this point. But obviously I think, Justin Britt's probably not going to be around forever. So I don't know.
Yeah. And speaking of other offensive linemen on the team, some of those guys are rookies. So moving in chronological order to the draft and, to talk about it now that we've had some time. Mina, we were just talking about how Danny hasn't been on the show all year. You haven't been on the show in 2017. So we can basically talk about anything pretty much since the end of last season, covering some bases here. So the biggest name that the Seahawks took in the draft being Malik McDowell, their first pick at the top of the second round after a couple trade downs. I think everybody can agree that the moves down to acquire more picks and still get not really at this point seemingly lose any amount of talent from where they were originally at 26 to getting McDowell at 35. And we talked so much about offensive line. A lot of people talked about cornerback. Anytime you can get certain, like an outside pass rusher, it makes sense. But Malik McDowell as an interior player, how satisfied, we'll start with you, Mina, when you first heard about the Malik McDowell pick and first started to hear some more things about Malik McDowell. So there's the talk about the effort. There was the talk about how badly he wanted to be a great player and also how physically dominant and exceptional he was. So overall, what did you find out about Malik McDowell that made you feel either good or bad? And how did you think it fell into the Seahawks' plans as far as what they needed?
I think that like a lot of fans, I fall victim to, even though the mock drafts are so irrelevant, no offense, I'm sure you guys both did, but I know Danny did like 300, but
I don't care.
I fall victim to, caring so much about the 20 guys I've heard associated with the team, and you fall in love with your Kevin Kings and your Buda Bakers, the guys from home too. So there's always that initial shock when there's a guy you just haven't thought about playing on the team, maybe even at a position you hadn't really thought they would go first at. And we should know better as Seahawks fans, right? Like we should be used to it. Yet we think, oh yeah, they're definitely going to take the Pac-12 cornerback that we all like, who trains with Earl Thomas. Absolutely. Like, of course they're not going to do that. Of course
James
they're going
Carpenter.
to do something weird. Oh, God. Did you see the PFF thing about how great he's been? That was nice. But, you know, like, of course they're going to do the thing you don't think and the position you don't expect and the guy you haven't watched a lot of. I haven't watched a lot of Michigan State football this year. So once I got over that initial, I think, sense of opportunity cost, I really liked it because I liked the fact that they went for that position. I think depth there was kind of a looming issue that I hadn't really been considering, and one that has haunted the team over the last 2 years at times. And for a guy, you know, I like the tape. I saw him immediately in the highlights. And for a guy, for his biggest red flag to be effort, I think that is always something I'm going to be comfortable with, especially, you know, playing for Chris Richard and Pete Carroll. But I'd rather see that than mysterious ACL injury or something. So I was pretty happy with the pick, actually, once I finally got over my disappointment and settled into a groove of actually figuring out who he was. And I think, you know, it is going to be really, really nice to have that depth on the line this year.
Yeah, and Danny, I'm going to just act like someone on the dating game. Same question.
Well, I actually watched quite a bit of him before the draft. He was kind of one of those. He was a hot button topic. Like, I feel like he was one of those guys that people either hate him or love him. And I kind of came out on the spectrum of really, really liking him before the draft. I think obviously you have to kind of heed those concerns where, you know, maybe his coaching staff beat him up a little bit to scouts where he's not a hard worker or self-starter or all that stuff. And it kind of, you know, obviously that stuff is worrying because guys that just don't love football or don't want to, like, you know, work their ass off and do all that don't tend to last very long in the NFL, especially if they're not like transcendent, you know, athletes or whatever. So that's a concern for sure. But I don't have like any real knowledge of that. I don't really know, you know, I don't have any firsthand knowledge. You kind of have to take the word of whoever is, you know, we're making these reports. So just based on what I saw on tape, I really liked him. Like he moves really, really well for a big guy. He's real long, strong. You know, he's really good against the run too, in my opinion. So I think he fits a lot what they really want up front. And, you know, they've been looking for a tall guy that can rush the passer forever. And obviously I think there was a couple comparisons to Calais Campbell, and I don't know if that's like pushing it a little bit in terms of too optimistic or whatever, but I do know that they've been looking for a guy like this for a long time. And I think he has a lot of upside as kind of like a Campbell type of guy where, you know, you're a tall, huge guy that you can play 3 or 4 positions on the line. And you know, he's a good run stuffer, but at the same time, he has a bonus of being a pretty good passer too. So I kind of liked it. I mean, I'm excited for it, and I'm excited to watch him play. My guess is he's not going to do anything earth-shattering the first year, but kind of like Frank Clark, I think you could probably see him like in the second or third year of his career start to develop and start to come into his own. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I think that it is worthy of being an exciting pick. You know, there was talk about Malik McDowell being a top 5 pick at one point,
right?
Because physically he is so unique. And when you break down his measurables from the combine and his size, you're really getting closer to, not exactly into, but closer to the Aaron Donald and Geno Atkins territory. Significantly different, but in terms of that second tier of guys from behind Atkins and Donald in terms of size and speed, he'd be like at the edge of the top half of that next level. So there is that, and certainly playing between Michael Bennett, Cliff Avril, and Frank Clark and around those guys, and Jaron Reed.
Big.
I mean, it's an incredible defensive line. Just rounding out the draft now, we've got 9 or 10 other guys that they drafted. A lot of them on day 2, which gave us a lot of second and third round picks, mostly third round picks. And then right at the top of the 4th with Tedrick Thompson, the Seahawks for the first time really used a lot of draft capital on cornerbacks and safeties and secondary players in the Pete Carroll era, including Shaq Griffin, the highest drafted cornerback under Pete Carroll, and Delano Hill, who also went in the 3rd round. And then other players, including Naz Jones, another defensive tackle. Any of these guys, and Amara Darboh, wide receiver, any of these guys stand out to you, rookies that you want to watch the most or are most excited about seeing next season and long term? Mina?
Well, I mean, so how much have you guys talked about Shaq Griffin?
We haven't talked at all about him.
Okay, so he's the one who seems to be getting the most hype going into the preseason, unless I'm wrong, probably because he's the one where there's arguably the hole that clearly needs to be filled by a starter. And, so you've got quotes, you've got some really, really hype quotes coming out about how his mental, and that actually it is worth talking about, though, those quotes that from, I can't remember if it was Rashard or if it was other guys on the defense, talking, though, about his ability to understand their style of play in the mental game, because they haven't really seen that much action. That's telling, right? In a system where so many cornerbacks have come in and not been able to pick it up, for them to focus on that with him, I think is really promising, because it does increasingly look like he's going to be called to action fairly early. I don't know if Jeremy Lane is going to start outside, which is entirely possible, but he's not going to end the season there. I'll tell you that. And I think they would love to move Shaq Griffin there as soon as possible to play across from Sherman.
Is Nico Thorpe the favorite right now to start opposite Sherman? Or I mean, obviously it depends on what happens with Lane, whether they just play him only in the slot or not. But is that kind of what the consensus thought is?
The last thing I saw was that the three of them were in the mix.
Is DeAndre Elliott an option there too? Like, I mean, that's the thing. I have no idea what's happening at the Seahawks cornerback position. I mean, not that I haven't been paying attention. It's just like there's so many variables right now. There's so many different guys that could kind of start to, stand out.
Thorpe played in a game last year, right? Obviously everyone remembers his special team play, but he had a couple, at least one or two games where he got a lot of reps at outside back.
I think ultimately right now where they stand is where we stand on a lot of things like the offensive line and, some of these other things and how they'll shake out. But it's just basically, either I think the first plan will be having Jeremy Lane on the outside and Shaq Griffin in the slot, or maybe, you'd still talk about Bradley McDougald taking a lot of those snaps up as well. And I think, that's where the Nico Thorpe's going to come into play. And maybe Pierre Desir is a guy that a lot of people like. We don't know how well Mike Tyson will do out of the gate. And certainly DeAndre Elliott in there too. So
keep forgetting they have a guy named Mike Tyson. Yeah.
It went through. And I also appreciate that pretty much he goes by Mike, it doesn't go by Michael. Let's
not trying to call me Michael.
Trump's lawyer's name is Ty Cobb. Why would you not go by Tyler if your name was Ty Cobb? Like, why do you make that decision? Ty. It's Ty Cobb. I don't understand.
Something that we've been talking a lot about, not just like over since mid-season last year, but it's come up a lot in the last couple of weeks. It's the topic of Jermaine Kearse. He was so derided last season for, he signs this contract. Some people thought it was fine. Some people, I didn't think it was a great move, but whatever. And he comes out with just a dump of a season, especially in the second half, catching 33% of his targets in the last 8 games, per a recent article on field goals. And really just, there's just a lot of talk surrounding, is Jermaine Kearse more of, a sinkhole on the offense rather than someone who's at the very least, non-consequential. And it seems like at this point where you've got to talk about, how Tyler Lockett and Paul Richardson and Amara Darboh and Tanner McAvoy are going to come into play. Will any of the other young guys like Cyril Grayson or David Moore, or Kenny Lawler, Casey Williams, any of these guys come into play? How much do you like or loathe Jermaine Kearse, starting with Danny?
There's no middle ground. Loathe. I am not high on him. I'll put it that way. I don't loathe him. I kind of just have been picturing this season as like it's going to be the Baldwin Lockett Richardson show for the most part, and then Kearse will be in there if injuries happen, and obviously with Lockett and Richardson, that's pretty highly likely. But I kind of feel like Kearse is the number 4 guy right now. I'm actually, you're asking what rookies you're excited about. I kind of like the idea of Darboh. I'm really interested to see how he looks in camp and training camp and the preseason and all that. Just coming from a pro system. He's got size. He's not going to be like a major, he's not going to get a ton of snaps or targets, but he's kind of got the size that they were looking for, the speed and the experience in the pro style system, that he could be kind of like a, I don't know what to call it, just like a situational guy that they could utilize in terms of in the red zone or on, deep shots here and there or whatever. But kind of excited to see how he turns out. Obviously, I'm kind of snake bitten with the Seahawks receivers over the years. Obviously, Lockett's been great, but I remember being very excited about several other Seahawks guys when they draft them, and that never, amounted to much.
Which ones? Who are some of the recent receivers you've been bummed out by from the drafts?
Well, Richardson until last year was a bummer.
Yeah.
Chris Harper. I can't even remember their names. Like, I was pretty excited about Chris Harper.
He
first got drafted.
He had a few good games. Yeah.
Chris Durham.
Yep.
Chris Matthews, Chris Harper. The kid out of Alabama.
So Matthews too.
Kevin Norwood.
Yeah.
I thought he profiled to replace Jermaine Kearse pretty clearly. I think I've just been excited for guys to replace Jermaine Kearse. And Darbo also, he has the body type, the skill set.
Totally. That's why I'm excited about it. At the same time, I'm like, but on the same hand, it's like, oh God, this is exactly what I was just saying about Chris Harper and Norwood. So it's like, I don't know. We'll see. But I am excited about it for now.
Yeah.
And Mina, give me those JK thoughts. Jermaine Kearse, what are you thinking? Love,
JK. Hate? He was bad last year. Like, there's no beating around the bush, and he was arguably underrated the year before. He cannot play at the level he played at last season and stay on and start for this team, simply put, because I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but he is, for whatever reason, maybe because they're bros, but maybe because of size, maybe because of the types of plays that they draw up for him, he is a bit of a security blanket for Russell Wilson, and he's not good enough or trustworthy enough to be that security blanket. But when they put him on the field, Wilson does look for him and go to him in certain situations that you don't want him to. So
especially in the red zone.
Especially in the red zone, right? And he becomes a liability, and that's what's frustrating. I think a lot of the time, in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily even that the play is throw to Jermaine Kearse. I think Russell Wilson looks for him, and that's irritating. So, I mean, his catch rate, I don't have it in front of me, last season was absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. It was horrible in the red zone. So I'm not ready.
I think he led the team in red zone targets.
So frustrating, man. I know. I think there's something like we put it next to Jimmy Graham. The answer is you walk off a cliff. It's very frustrating. So I think, how many years does he have left? He's in the second year of a 3-year.
I think so, yeah.
So they can probably easily cut him after this year.
Yeah.
I mean, this is his last chances of the whole season, but this is his shot with the team. Like many fans, I think I feel the same way as most fans, especially because wide receiver is arguably a group of strength for the team. I don't really think they have many needs there, to be honest, aside from the 3 guys you mentioned and then the potential ones behind them. I say that, and 2 of them are clearly injury prone. So that's probably an ignorant thing to say. And I think we might be all over investing in Paul Richardson at this point.
Has anyone ever compared Jermaine Kearse to Jay Cutler?
No.
Is Kearse the Jay Cutler of receivers? Like, just terrible body language, like makes big plays sometimes, so most of the time you just kind of hate him.
That's fair.
Yeah, the body language thing is interesting because, it does. There does seem to be a lack of effort on certain plays. I think that's what also makes him so frustrating to fans.
We're just about out of time for this episode.
We can go for a little bit more, Kenny, if you need.
I'm chill. I'm sorry, guys.
So we got Mina going on here, so let's keep it going for like 15 more.
Just for old time's sake. Yay.
Yeah. I was trying to adhere to some potential time restrictions, but I will extend the clock, of course.
Overtime, baby.
Since we got a little bit of bonus time, and we can talk about some other things that we haven't talked about as of yet. One of the things that, hasn't been talked about a ton, and I don't know how much it needs to be talked about, but at the same time, if it's not being brought up at all, then I think there's room to really sort of unpack this a little bit. The Seahawks really, for the first time of note since maybe 2011, basically cut ways with some coaches and sort of made some changes in terms of who are the guys that are going to be, teaching our guys, because nobody was concerned that much prior to, 2016. They had 2 Super Bowls. The last, their last loss, you could talk about to the Carolina Panthers in those playoffs. You could talk about, well, it's fine, they'll come back next year. And then, some things didn't go well, including the run game finishing in the bottom third, which is highly unlikely of a Pete Carroll team. The struggles in the secondary with Earl Thomas, which clearly, point to the fact that Earl Thomas is way more valuable than the system itself. And you would start to see that, okay, now the Seahawks are coming in next year without Rocky Sito, without Sherman Smith, without Lofa Tatupu. They're starting to make a few changes. And the coaching, I don't know how much it's going to change. And nobody really knows. We can't even decide which players are going to play at which positions, because there's going to be so much decided in the next month or two, But overall, your feelings in terms of how much the Seahawks need to start changing course, and whether or not, anybody, whether or not this may have an effect on them one way or another. How much different do you think the Seahawks could look or should look beginning in 2017, Mina?
I don't think they need to look that different. If Earl Thomas is healthy and their defensive line is bolstered, I don't really, and they find whoever the guy is at the other cornerback position, I don't think there's anything dramatic needed on the defense. On the offensive side, like you said, there were a lot of things that were unpredictable in terms of the injuries. Wilson, what happened there, the inability to get the run game going, but they aren't blow it up problems in my mind. And of the coaches you made, no one really jumped out at me as someone I'd been kind of heard as a potential coordinator. Maybe Rocky Sito a few years ago, but so I'm not too concerned about those either. It feels so simplistic to say, but this team is in a great position. I mean, the conference is terrible. Yeah. It's the weakest it's been in years, and they pretty much have everyone they need. The only issue is going to be whether or not Wilson can stay upright, in my mind. I really think it's as simple as that.
I don't think the Rocky Sito thing.
You still die on curse.
No, I don't think the Rocky Sito thing is all that big of a deal. Hopefully,
yeah.
It was interesting that they fired or / let go of Sherman Smith. I don't know. I would like to hear a little bit more about that, because he clearly didn't want to leave. Like, he did interviews afterwards where he was like,
he was quoted in our story on the Seahawks that ran in the magazine, which
yeah, he didn't. I don't think he was stoked about that, it's kind of an interesting thing, because I don't know what Carroll's thinking on that is, but I don't know. To me, it's not that big of a deal. I think for the lower level coaches and position coaches, I think the big thing for Carroll is bringing energy and enthusiasm and getting guys going. And I don't think Sherman. I wonder if Sherman Smith maybe was just a little too laid back or something like that. Maybe.
I think there's a lot of frustration with the run game last year, and I'm sure you guys went over this in detail at the beginning while I was sleeping on my keyboard, but I do not know. People have been asking me the number one thing when I talk about the Seahawks and with non-Seahawks people or national people or whatever is, well, who's going to be the running back? I do not know what that running game is look like, because I truly have no idea if Rawls or Lacey is going to be the lead back, and I don't know how healthy CJ Procise is and how much they plan on working him in. That balance of attack is completely a mystery to me. I love all the pieces though, and I'm excited about it actually.
Yeah. I think of all the things I'm excited to watch in the preseason for the Seahawks is the running backs group, because we're going to have a new fullback, Algernon Brown, who everyone seems pretty excited about. I really liked Mike Davis back in college. So they were able to pick him up. I think it'll be interesting to see him run. Alex Collins showed a little bit at times last year. I've never been super duper high on him. I think he's okay, but he showed some stuff last year when he got some chances, and it'll be interesting to see if he's, kind of a dark horse to be the next Rawls, kind of come out of nowhere guy. I like Procise. they seem pretty excited about this Chris Carson guy. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting running back group, and it'll be a lot of fun to kind of see who stands out in the preseason. Obviously, we tend to get really excited about, preseason running back performances in Seattle based on, just like who's going to back up Marshawn Lynch over the last like 5 years or whatever. But, and then they always end up cutting the guy. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's a really interesting group. My money is probably on Lacey being the guy that gets the most carries if he can stay healthy, but I still like Rawls. And I like some of those other guys too, just in case Lacey can't get healthy or whatever.
Yeah, I would not draft either in fantasy. Let's just say that.
No, definitely not.
I mean, the Seahawks, we talked about the fact that the Seahawks have put themselves in a position to make decisions with a lot of guys because they only signed 1-year contracts this year. So for the guys they brought in or the guys they retained, just 1-year contracts. So next year, there could be an influx of decisions about, if they have good seasons, what they're going to do with someone like Luke Jokel, or what they're going to do with someone like Eddie Lacy if they have good seasons, what they're going to do with, someone like Deshaun Shedd if he comes back and he has a good end to his year. Are they going to try and bring him back long term? But some of these other guys that we've been talking about a little bit and the decisions that they have to make, Cam Chancellor, Jimmy Graham, Justin Britt, all hitting the end of their contracts after this season. How would you sort of rank the importance of those three, taking into account age, taking into account health and how much they'll cost and affordability? If you only had to choose one between Britt, Cam, and Graham, who would be the one that you're going to take that you're going to, lock in? And who's the one that maybe you're like, okay, maybe it's something that we have to face, a reality without this certain player, Danny?
Man, that's tough. I think I would narrow it down to between Britt and Graham. I think that Chancellor has been awesome and I really like him as a player, but he's just, I don't know how much his body's going to hold up anymore. That's the biggest worry for me. If you extend Cam long term, like I would just worry so much that his body's going to break down. Obviously, Jimmy Graham is an injury concern too, but it seems like his knee held up really well last year. I still think he's a very dynamic weapon in their offense, and I really like him in the offense. And then it's just at the same time, it's just depressing to think like they'll just let another guy go after developing him for 4 years and having him turn into something good. So honestly, I'd probably go with Britt. Just for the youth factor, and they just need to spend some money on that offensive line to like get a little bit of continuity and everything. I think it could go a long way to have a good offensive line. I think I'll put it this way: I think it'd be more valuable to Russell Wilson to have a good offensive line than it would be to have Jimmy Graham. So, but I really like Graham too. It's nothing against Graham. I think he's a underrated player in the Seahawks offense. I think people kind of give him shit a lot, but I still like him in that offense. But final answer, I would go with Britt.
But trying to hand that torch over to Mina.
Yeah, so I would love it if they could keep Cam Chancellor on like a Michael Bennett style extension where he's, like maybe 2 more years on the team. He's 29, but he's so well regarded around the league that I think that's a bit of a stretch. It really depends on how people perceive his fragility and injury history, right? That would be optimal for the team because I do think he was fantastic last year. He was really, really good after he came back and does play such an important role in the team. A role that, like we've been talking about Earl and how much the team fell off when he wasn't there, but they fell off pretty good when Cam was gone too. And we haven't seen how they play without Richard Sherman. So they're all fantastic players. And I don't think either of them are easily replaceable by any means. But I would probably knock him out of this discussion too.
It's tough.
Britt, this is tough because these are 3 players who I actually think are about at the same tier in terms of importance to the team, which is really interesting. Britt, part of the reason I agree with you, Danny, and I think he'd be a good guy to keep is that centers haven't been getting extraordinarily overpaid relative to other positions on the line. So it seems feasible that they could keep him. I agree the continuity thing would be so important. And if they can get the run game going, behind having that behind him and having him be there for a few more years to anchor the line would be key. He has been really, really good. So I would probably lean there unless Jimmy Graham drastically increases his red zone usage this season, in which case I would revert to Graham because they do need that weapon and they haven't had it. But for otherwise, I would probably stick with Britt.
Yeah, that's been my biggest thing with Graham too, is like his ultimate. The reason I was so excited when they traded for him is that he's been one of the biggest touchdown makers in the NFL over his career. And they just haven't been able to get that same kind of red zone threat out of him here, whether that's on Wilson or that's on Bevel or, a combination of everything on Graham a little bit too. But I think I looked at the numbers last year. It's like inside the 10-yard line, they barely even look at him. Yeah. And that's like where he was so deadly for the Saints. Like, he would just run things and like run little like out routes and like box a guy out and you just throw it up high to him. And that's exactly what I pictured them doing with him. And it just never really happened. So if it doesn't happen this year, then I'm definitely in on the Brit thing. But if they can figure that out, then that's really, really valuable.
I mean, I'll take a stance against you guys. I don't mind. I'll put my stick in the ground.
Embrace debate.
I don't care about Justin Britt. I don't really care if he's around. And, I don't think drafting Joey Hunt and Ethan Posick in the last 2 years is a total mistake. I think there's some thought process there that Justin Britt's going to be hitting that free agency in 2018. Posick, there might be a guy that they do try at tackle and guard, but at the end of the day, Justin Britt wasn't a center before he became a center. At least Ethan Posick was an All-American center last year. So I think that Justin Britt, and they just don't care about offensive linemen. I mean, agree or disagree, they just don't.
Yeah.
And I think, that at the end of the day, even if Justin Britt, I mean, how much can Justin Britt or any center anchor that offensive line if it was so bad last year? Because he was the best player and it was so bad. So I think they're much more hopeful, or at least I'm a little bit more hopeful about, maybe George Fant and how much progress he can make, or, Jermaine Afidi and how much progress he can make. But so I eliminate Justin Britt right away. I don't think that paying $7 million to a center is going to be something that they have much interest in. And I think that's probably about what he could get. You look at what J.C. Treader got with the Cleveland Browns, and J.C. Treader wasn't even a starting center until a few games last year. So for me, I would knock Justin Britt out of that. God, coming down to Graham and Cam, it's neck and neck, but given that they had success prior to Jimmy Graham and that they had success without Jimmy Graham when he got injured at the end of 2015, I would probably, go with Cam Chancellor. I think there's an opportunity or a chance that he's been at a bump in the road for injury wise in the last couple of years, and maybe he plays 6 more years. So I would definitely agree with Mina to try and get that contract extension locked in this year. And then you can address Justin Britt and Jimmy Graham next year and see what happens. Jimmy Graham might, be priced out of Seattle, or maybe he'll hit the right amount. But if to give a balance, I guess, or to at least think about, I'm going to go with I don't care about Justin Britt, and that's my final answer.
I think that's probably closest to what the Seahawks think too.
Yeah, as you were talking there, I thought Tom Cable had jumped on this call.
Exactly.
When you said they weren't going to pay him that, I was like, yeah, that is reality. Maybe that's why Danny and I are rooting for it, because it would signal a change in mindset, if anything else.
Yeah.
But you're right in that I don't think it's incredibly likely.
Kenny, let's do lightning round a few of these questions from Twitter.
Okay, yeah, we'll get a few of these, and then I have one last final question for you guys both. But and I'll just add in some of this information, since Ben Baldwin has tweeted it at me, that all of the red zone targets for the Seahawks over the last 2 seasons, Doug Baldwin has caught 20 of 31 of his red zone targets for 12 touchdowns. Jimmy Graham has caught 9 of 25 for 5 touchdowns, and Jermaine Kearse has caught 7 of 24 for 4 touchdowns. So Doug Baldwin, one of the best red zone threats in the NFL, surprisingly enough. Graham and Kearse, pretty bad. And maybe that some of that's going to fall on Russell Wilson, the decision-making, Darrell Bevell, who knows. But, man, I mean, I know that we're going to lightning round some of these questions, but really quickly, Doug Baldwin over the last 2 years, how surprised are you that he's been this productive, that he's been so crazy productive, especially as a red zone touchdown threat, Mina?
I'm not. I feel like Doug Baldwin is the guy in the romantic comedy that the girl is friends with and then realizes 75% of the way through that he was there all along. But I see you, Doug Baldwin, and I know how great you are, and I love you, and I have loved every dollar they've paid you. I felt was well spent, even though you didn't want to talk to me the time I approached you at a hotel in Miami because you said you were busy. I still love you. But yeah, I'm not. The curse number is absolutely atrocious. But what the numbers you just read to me, I mean, that makes sense. Is Ben Baldwin related to Doug Baldwin? Because he could be biased. He could be futzing the numbers.
Ben Baldwin is Doug Baldwin.
Oh, plot twist! Wow. Okay.
Danny, Doug Baldwin thoughts?
He has a lot of time.
It doesn't surprise me. No. It's crazy that he's still kind of one of the more underrated guys. Like no one really talks about him in the same breath as like some of the top NFL receivers, but his numbers are ridiculous. So obviously, you have to be more efficient. You have to look at the efficiency numbers more in the Seahawks offense because they just don't throw the ball very much, and they're all about like limiting turnovers and all that. But
yeah,
it doesn't. I mean, I still go back to the first day I saw him in training camp, and I was just like, God, who is this guy? Because he was just. I mean, he's been so good from the very beginning. I don't know how he didn't get drafted, honestly. So I just remember watching him. I was actually sitting down the berm with Davis Sue, and we were both like, dude, this guy's making the team. And neither of us had really even heard of him. He was like a, undrafted guy. So from the very beginning, I've been like, this guy's really, really good. And it's cool to see him kind of getting some of the recognition now, but he's still pretty underrated.
Big time.
So we're going to hit a few of these Twitter questions real quick. As I'm scanning them for the first time, we've addressed a lot of this stuff already. So if I didn't address your question, it's because hopefully I think it's already been addressed. This is an interesting one, though, from at Jason Rook. Is there anything in covering the Seahawks now that you wish you would have known when you first started? Which is an interesting question to think about. And if anything pops in your mind, anything that you know now after covering the Seahawks, Danny, for you, it's been, 7-ish years. Mina, you started, you don't specifically cover the Seahawks, but you've been writing about sports for 5 or 6 years. And a lot of that stuff has obviously been about the Seahawks. So in learning about the Seahawks, maybe getting more intimate with that news every day, anything that you learn now that you wish you would have known when you first started?
Not to get excited about receivers taken in the mid-round.
Yeah.
Not to think you can predict Seahawks draft picks and bet on guys from University of Washington that you fall in love with. Assume the weirdest, worst, strangest picks.
Yeah.
I think that is actually it. Like at the end of the day, like you can't really predict this team. Like we've done like a deep dive into this team over the last 7 years on basically everything we can possibly do, and they still are just like, what the fuck? Like every time they do something. So
yeah, they're
don't try and guess.
Yeah, there aren't like, it's funny for all of the spark stuff and the tendencies that and this and that. They're still, I think, much more unpredictable than a lot of teams in the NFL. Not just in the guys that they choose, but where they invest their money, how they deploy resources. I mean, they're very, very. They just go against the grain, I think, in every way.
BVM asked the same question that I did about Jimmy Cam or Justin. So there you go. We were on.
I thought you had seen that.
No, I hadn't.
Yeah.
Nice work.
Is health of key players, from Eric LeDrew, is health of key players really the only difference between 10-6 and 12-4 for the Seahawks this year? Or do they still have deeper issues? Mina?
I want to say yes, although I think offensive line play doesn't necessarily fall under health. I think if this is an F offensive line, then they can't get above 10 wins. If it's a C- offensive line, which is where my ceiling is, then they can. And that to me is going to be the differentiation point.
I think I would lean towards yes, health is the main difference. So like if they can stay healthy, I think this is a 12-win team.
Well, I guess if Russell Wilson can stay healthy, reflects.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
So yeah, I think they could be a 12-win team if they stay healthy.
Mina, if you could, this is from Brian Rugg. Mina, if you could only etch a sketch one more time, what would the subject be?
One final etch and sketch. It would be Pete Carroll standing in Minneapolis as confetti raised down because the Seahawks just won another Super Bowl.
Oh, good one. Good one.
A beautiful image that will be seared in my mind forever.
Danny, if you had one artistic skill, what would it be?
Does making gifts count?
Yeah.
Are you getting good at that?
Well, no, not really. I don't have any artistic skills to speak of. Whittling, I guess. I don't know. I can't do any of that.
Well, and my skill is podcasting, so whatever. It's that pretty much covers all the Twitter questions. As I teased before, I did one more question for you guys both. It's sort of just an all-encompassing sort of question. We're gonna talk about sort of expectations for next season. So I know that I talk a lot as is, but if I'm going to go on for about 2 minutes here. So everybody, if you don't like me, I guess mute the podcast or skip ahead 2 minutes.
Nice.
But then you'll miss the question. So yeah, we've been talking about it. Mina, you missed the first 10 minutes or whatever, but you know what the Seahawks did in, I don't know, the end. Maybe we just talked about how the last season ended and the injuries, Earl Thomas, blah, blah, blah. And here we are. So the Seahawks, they come back now. It's going to be the 8th season under Pete Carroll. It's going to be the 7th season with Darrell Bevell as the offensive coordinator. It'll be the 3rd season with Chris Richard as the defensive coordinator. They've been to the divisional round of the playoffs for 5 straight years. They've been to 2 Super Bowls. They've won a Super Bowl. They've only been blown out, one time since 2011, if you want to count more than 10 points as a blowout. And then I guess the Falcons lost by 16 points. That'll be 2 games by more than 10 points. But certainly some things changed last year that made them, not as good of a team, whether it was the days that the offense didn't show up because they scored 5 points against the Bucs or 6 points against the Arizona Cardinals in a tie, and then there was the days that they didn't have Earl Thomas and they started giving up more than 30 points in some of those games, which they hadn't done prior to losing Earl Thomas. That being said, here we go into next season, and what are the changes that the Seahawks have really made that would maybe improve them from being a 10-5-1 team to maybe a 13-3 team, or maybe changes that would keep them right around 10-6, or maybe things that they haven't, foreseen yet or accounted for that'll make them 6-10. And so that's what we start to look at as the Seahawks, go into free agency and their offensive line. What did they do? They add Luke Jokel. They add Ode Ibushi through free agency. They have Ethan Posick and Justin Sr. as the guys that they drafted, but they're getting continuity, as we said, with Justin Britt staying at center. Maybe some of these other guys like Jermaine Afidi now has a year under his belt. George Fant has some time under his belt, at least as a football player. Maybe they start to figure out what to do to either cut Jermaine Kearse back, or maybe he gets back on the right track. Paul Richardson started to show some things at the end of last year that are really exceptional talent. So when you look at the receiver group with Tyler Lockett and Doug Baldwin and Paul Richardson and adding Amara Darboh, they have some talent. They have some really good talent there. And they have Jimmy Graham, who's a top 3 tight end. And the backup tight ends for backup tight ends are pretty good between Nick Vannett and Luke Wilson. And then the key, as you had already said, Mina, just being Russell Wilson's health. Can they keep him healthy, really stay healthy? If he's healthy and he's able to move around and do what he wants to do, we know that Russell Wilson is a top 5 quarterback. And even when he's a little banged up, he's still right there on the cusp, at least of the top 10. So that's when you really know that you have an exceptional quarterback. So you know what they've got there with Russell Wilson. Adding in the run game with Eddie Lacy, who for his first 2 years in the league was one of the top running backs in the NFL. And even last season before he was injured, averaging more than 5 yards per carry and seemed to be back to what Eddie Lacy could do. And now that he knows he's got a 1-year contract where he really has to maybe get his stuff together so he can go into next season. And even for running backs, maybe it only means a 3-year contract around $20 million or $18 million if he did really, really well. But still, Eddie Lacy, a chance for him to make more money. So certainly, I think the offense, you can say they've upgraded at most positions where they needed an upgrade. And on defense, I think you really look at the starting lineup, and it has to be up there for consideration as the best defense in the NFL, starting a lineup type talent. Michael Bennett and Cliff Abel, both Pro Bowl players. Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, both Pro Bowl players. And Bobby Wagner certainly is going to be up for the running of Defensive Player of the Year if he plays at all like he did last year. Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, and Cam Chancellor, all Hall of Fame level secondary players who are still in their 20s. And then, the upgrades at cornerback, where you would think at least they have a good shot at having more of an opportunity than they did last year by having, Shaquille Griffin and Delano Hill and Tedrick Thompson and Mike Tyson and DeAndre Elliott and all this talent infused with Nico Thorpe and Jeremy Lane and Bradley McDougald. I mean, those are the guys that aren't Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, and Earl Thomas. So certainly the secondary has to be talented as well. The special teams, I think they've added guys in terms of coverage that are going to be more helpful than the guys that are around last year, but it's really hard to say, and we'll just see how that goes. You know, the transition from Stephen Hauschka to Blair Walsh, will it make any difference? Will it not make it? It's not like you could get much worse than what Stephen Hauschka did last year anyway, so you would think that hopefully it can only get better from there. And then finally, just one of the most important things that any team has to look at, which is the schedule. And after they played the Green Bay Packers in week 1 at Lambeau, after that you can really see how maybe their schedule isn't that difficult. As we were talking about earlier, the NFC West is looking abysmal. The Cardinals seem like at best an 8-8 team. The LA Rams should maybe be at best a 6-10 team. And the San Francisco 49ers maybe at best a 5-11 team. So nobody really up there for the challenge. It looks like right now for the Seahawks being able to win the NFC West in terms of whether or not they'll be able to get up to that 1 or 2 seed in the NFC, you know, with their biggest competition being maybe the Green Bay Packers, the Dallas Cowboys, the Atlanta Falcons, and all of those teams have some sort of flaw that you could see exposed, or, you know, at a time where I don't think the Dallas Cowboys are going to even win their own division. And the Atlanta Falcons, I think they have plenty of things that they need to work out after blowing the Super Bowl last year and losing Kyle Shanahan and trying to find their identity, but I think they've got some good things going on. And you look at the fact that the Seahawks, they play against the NFC West, they play against the AFC South. Their schedule is going to be coming out, and I think, you know, there's opportunities there for them to maybe get back to their pre-2016 and even pre-2015 status as a team that could be in that top 2 to 3. So relaying out all of the things that I've said about the Seahawks going into this coming season, how high are your expectations? Are you back? Are you back to that level of the Seahawks? I think the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl. Can you make a bold statement like that you think that they are that good? Or do you think I'm still pretty skeptical based on the issues that they had last year? I would say hold your horses if you think that they're going to suddenly go from a team that couldn't possibly score 6 points in a single game. So with all that being said, I estimated it was going to be 2 minutes. It came out to much longer than that.
That was quite the.
I replied to an email, actually. Yeah, it was long.
To be fair, I haven't done a podcast in like 2.5 months, so I guess there was a lot of pent up things that needed to be said. And the gang hasn't gotten together for, you know, at least a year. So here we are. I've just outlined our total recap of the Seahawks from last season to now. Mina, what do you think about them Hawks?
All right, you asked if this team can win the Super Bowl, so I will tell you how I feel. I think there's no question in my mind this team's going to win the division, right? I think they're going to finish with a really strong record. But I would probably pin it at 11 wins just because you never want to pin, you know, higher than that pretty much ever. But that's a lot. I think they have a really good shot of taking the conference. I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to regress. I'm a little worried about the Packers, as always. But I'm not super concerned about the other teams. I think that's for me. Am I missing anyone that you guys think would be a strong contender in the NFC? Falcons, I think, are going to regress too.
The Giants, maybe?
Yeah, they don't scare me. So I think they have a good shot of taking the conference. I would put their odds of winning the Super Bowl a lot lower because I think the New England Patriots are absolutely terrifying and beefed up in a very unfair way. However, injuries happen. They've got some old guys, so you know, I don't want to be gloom and doom there. But I do think the schedule was a lot nicer than I thought it could be. Mm-hmm. And I cannot stress enough how the weakness of the division, how good that is for this team. So I'm feeling good about this season. I'm very optimistic. Danny?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't ever like say like, oh, I think they're going to win the Super Bowl this year, but I think they're good enough to win the Super Bowl. I'll put it that way. I think, I don't think they have any major holes, you know, in terms of relative to what other teams are going through. I mean, Kenny, you named off like the freaking talent on the defense is crazy. Like if you just take a step back and like look at who is on the Seahawks defense still, it's insane. I mean, Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, and that's not even getting into the defensive line like Bobby Wagner or Michael Bennett, Khalif Averill. Frank Clark is highly underrated as a player, and then you added Malik McDowell, you added in some of these rookies. I mean, their defense could be just freakishly good again. And yeah, I mean, and clearly, obviously, it all depends on how health goes. But I'm kind of like looking at, I think Russell Wilson's going to have a better year than he had last year. I think this is a team that's still very balanced. They're good on offense, good on defense. They're a little bit up in the air with the kicking game, but I don't know. I just think that they have enough talent to, I think they're a Super Bowl caliber team. I'll put it that way. I don't, I agree that I think they're going to win the division, and I think they're one of the best teams in the conference. So it wouldn't be like a crazy shock to me if they went back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I guess my answer to myself would be that of course the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl. If you don't have the guts to get on this podcast and say out loud, you think the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl, then what are you? How can you call yourself a Seahawks fan? Okay. Seahawks. I do think it'll be. I mean, I agree that the Patriots. I think the Patriots might be. They have an argument, I think, right now for maybe, top 10 something ish. I don't have all the rosters from me, but preseason roster talent, everything top to bottom. I mean, I've been ranking every single unit in the NFL. It's like ranking secondary, rank wide receiver, rank offensive line. The Patriots don't really have their biggest, they don't have a huge weakness, and most of their things are top 5. So certainly it'll be something pretty interesting to watch what the Patriots do. But I mean, even it'll be tough they still got to get through AFC playoffs, and anything can happen. So we'll see what happens. But certainly I think anyone with half a brain could say the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl this season with their devastating defense.
Tom Brady turns 40 years old in a month, guys. And if he had not had the second half in the Super Bowl, we would be having an entirely different conversation about him and this team. So I'm just throwing that out here. So
definitely.
It's come true, y'all.
And I just want to say also that big question speech I gave, all I had was a roster in front of me, guys. That was all off the top of the brain.
Damn.
That was dominant.
Wow.
Nice work.
No big deal.
You've been taking those improv classes.
That's right. Guys, come see me at the clubhouse in LA tonight at 9:30. My improv team will be doing a 10-minute set. So
I love it if you were doing an improv routine and then suddenly you just broke into a monologue about the Seahawks. Everybody would be so angry.
You never know. It's happened. It happens in, I do give monologues about the Seahawks sometimes. So
as one does. Yeah.
You guys, my improv's great. Mina lives pretty close to this improv theater, so who knows if she'll ever come out.
Can't come. Wow, I miss this. I miss us.
I miss us, guys. Let's get the game back together.
We're just all on the same page, which is wanting other teams to fail and not having to hide it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Danny, it's time for me to say goodbye to him. And one last thing, Mina, what do you think about Nick Cage's action movies in the 90s, like Con Air, Face Off, and The Rock?
You just mentioned 3 of the greatest movies of all time. That's what I think.
Wow.
Should have been here for the first 5 minutes.
I know. God, I feel bad now.
What are you talking about? Those movies are amazing. Were you against them?
No, I just wasn't. I wasn't quite as excited about them as you are.
Have you not seen The Rock?
No, I have seen The Rock.
How can you say that? Or Face Off? Oh my gosh.
We talked about Face Off.
Is a little bit lower in the pantheon for me.
Hey,
yeah, we talked about.
I loved The Rock.
It started out because Con Air. I'm pretty sure that the key date in the movie Con Air is July 14th, which is today's date.
That's why we started talking about.
He gets a letter from his daughter. I don't know.
Got it.
That's it for this episode of whatever you want to call it, Reeled in Field Goals Redux, Volume 2.
You're good at branding, Kenny.
Thank you. I have a LinkedIn out there for anyone who wants to, look into my background and my technical skills. Just linkedin.com/Kenneth Arthur, I think. I don't know how LinkedIn addresses work.
It's probably a bunch of numbers.
Speaking of social media addresses, you can find Mina on Twitter at Mina Kimes.
That's it. Just my name.
Yeah. And do you got any Bennett Brothers follow-ups coming up?
I have an E60 on Cam Chancellor coming out later this summer that Seahawks fans might be interested in. Yeah, so that'll be a lot of fun.
Hell yeah. tell them what you said on this podcast about.
We already did it.
Get cut.
No, I said I hope they extend him. He is wonderful. He is honestly one of the most nicest, most pleasant, most honest, open guys I've met in the NFL. So I think you guys will really enjoy it.
I love it. I'm looking forward to it.
You can find Danny on Twitter at Danny B. Kelly. But if you want to go to his old handle at Field Goals, you can follow that instead. And I'll retweet him once a month. So that's just as good, I think. And I guess you could follow me on Twitter as well. But you have to find out what my handle is. I'm not going to tell you. So you'll figure it out.
Wow, make him look for it.
Yeah. And that's it. We did it. We did a new episode of the podcast. I brought back, and I did it. I brought back two of the greats in terms of people that you guys like to hear, but give me credit for it. So that's it for this episode of the podcast about the Seahawks. It's July 14th, Con Air Day. Hashtag it. And I'll catch you on the next Con Air Day.